Consider a situation that is common among people whose incomes rise quickly. Someone reaches $15,000 a month, roughly triple what they earned a few years earlier. It is the most money they have ever made. And on payday, looking at the largest balance their account has ever held, they feel a familiar pressure, the sense of not having enough. It is the same pressure they had assumed would disappear once their income climbed. It did not disappear. It adjusted and stayed. This pattern is not unusual, and it does not happen by accident. It tends to develop the same way for most people who begin to earn more. It happens gradually, through a series of decisions that each appear reasonable on their own. A few years earlier, the same person earned $5,000 a month, and at that level, they felt comfortable. Not wealthy, but secure. The rent was modest, the car was paid off, or nearly so. Meals were usually cooked at home without much thought given to the cost. When a paycheck arrived, there was a clear gap between what came in and what was already committed, and that surplus was theirs to spend, save, or leave untouched. That gap was the source of the feeling of security. The income itself was not large, the margin around it was. Then came a promotion, a new title, and a significant raise, the kind that triples a monthly income. The appeal was obvious. With 3 times the money, the assumption was that financial pressure would end, that prices would stop mattering, and that there would finally be room to breathe. What follows is predictable. The increase does not disappear all at once. It is absorbed in installments, each one agreed to willingly. The first change is usually housing. The previous apartment was adequate, but a better one is now affordable, so the rent rises. Not by doubling, but by a few $100s for more space, a better location, and an amenity or two. Next is often the car. The old one still runs, but a monthly payment appears where there had been none, attached to a vehicle that better matches the new income. After that come the smaller expenses, which rarely stay small. Better groceries, more frequent takeout, a gym membership, subscriptions that are never canceled, and travel that feels earned. None of these decisions is reckless, and this is the part most people misunderstand about money. The image of someone who earns well and still struggles tends to involve obvious extravagance, but that is rarely the cause. In most cases, the strain comes from a series of choices that each looked responsible in isolation. Economists describe this tendency with a simple principle: expenses rise to meet income. When a household earns more, it generally finds, within a year or two, that it needs nearly all of the higher amount. Each upgrade becomes the new baseline. The larger apartment becomes the standard, the car payment becomes a fixed cost, and the conveniences become routine. The result is not greater wealth, but greater weight. Every dollar of the raise is assigned a purpose before it is ever seen, and the gap between income and obligations, the surplus that produced the original sense of security, remains roughly the same. Often, it is smaller. That is the first reason higher earners can feel poorer. The income grows, and the obligations expand to absorb it. The second reason operates entirely in how the mind measures money. The mind does not register how much a person has in absolute terms. It registers the distance between what they have and what they expected to have. At $5,000 a month, the point of comparison was the leaner life that came before, the smaller apartment, the tighter budget. Measured against that, the income felt like progress. But the point of comparison does not stay fixed. People adapt quickly to whatever they have. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation, and it is one of the most consistent findings in the field. Studies of lottery winners show that within a year or two, their day-to-day happiness tends to return to roughly what it was before. People who suffer serious setbacks also recover much of their earlier baseline. The mind resets toward a neutral point regardless of circumstances, and then waits for the next change. The same process applies to income. The apartment that felt impressive in the first month becomes ordinary by the 6th. The car stops being a reward and becomes simply transportation. The salary that seemed large on the day it was offered becomes normal, and once it is normal, it no longer produces the feeling of being well off. By this point, the comparison has shifted. The person is no longer measuring against their earlier life, but against the people now around them, and that circle changed when the income did.
At $5,000 a month, their peers earned roughly the same. At $15,000, the neighbors, colleagues, and social contacts often earn far more, some of them 2 or 3 times as much. Their homes are larger, their cars newer, their children in more expensive schools. The mind, which measures only distance, registers that gap and reports the conclusion it always reaches at the bottom of a comparison: behind and not enough.
The effect resembles crossing a great distance only to arrive among people who started farther ahead. The ground already covered stops counting. Only the distance still remaining registers. This points to the central idea. The feeling of being rich was never tied to the size of the income. It was tied to the size of the gap. Both the gap between what comes in and what is already committed, and the gap between what a person has and what they expected to have. At $5,000 a month, that gap was wide and expectations were modest, so the feeling was one of comfort. At $15,000, the gap is narrow and expectations are high, so the same person feels strained. The paycheck tripled, but the feeling moved in the opposite direction because the feeling was never measuring the paycheck. This is where the most consequential mistake occurs. People try to close the gap by earning still more, pursuing the next raise or promotion in the belief that a higher number will finally deliver a sense of security. It generally does not. The new income attracts new obligations, the new lifestyle becomes the new baseline, and the point of comparison shifts again. A moving target cannot be reached by earning faster, because no salary is high enough to satisfy a mind that resets to neutral each time it is fed. The factor that separates someone who feels strained at $15,000 a month from someone who feels secure at the same income is not how much they earn. It is how wide they keep the gap. When income rises, obligations do not have to rise with it. That is a choice, even when it does not feel like one. Part of the increase can be left uncommitted. The current apartment can be kept longer. A paid-off car can be driven for several more years. The distance between earnings and obligations can be widened on purpose rather than allowed to close on its own. That widening gap, when it is intentional, is a savings rate, and the savings rate, far more than income, determines whether a person is building wealth or simply funding a more expensive version of the same financial anxiety. The difference is clearest in direct comparison. 2 people each earn $15,000 a month. The first commits $14,000 of it to a life that looks successful but sits one difficult month away from trouble. The second commits $10,000, keeps the surplus wide and directs it toward ownership, investments and assets that generate income on their own. From the outside, the second person appears to earn less. They drive the older car and keep the smaller home. But they are the one accumulating wealth, because wealth is measured by what is kept and what that keeps growing, not by what is spent. The 2 incomes are identical. The financial positions are not. This is why income is not the thing being managed. Income can be pictured as water poured into a bucket, while the tendency for expenses to expand drills a hole sized precisely to each raise. Pouring faster does not keep the water. The water is kept by protecting the gap, by declining each time earnings rise to let spending rise in step with them. Seen this way, the sense of being poor at a high income is not a sign that the income is too small. It is the result of allowing everything around it to expand until the gap closed. The encouraging part is the reverse of the same fact. If the feeling never depended on the size of the number, then the number was never what stood in the way. The gap can be widened again whenever a person decides to, which means the earlier sense of security can be recovered by living, for a time, closer to the way one did at $5,000 a month while continuing to earn $15,000. Most people do not do this. They continue climbing, convinced that the next level of income is the one that will finally feel sufficient, and they spend much of their lives pursuing gains that stop counting the moment they are reached. The number will keep changing. The gap is the part that was always real.